Har matey, chapter 17, lesson 3 here. And we'll be talking about this issue of should a citizen support a government during wartime. In specifically, we're talking about the Vietnam War, aren't we, mateys? And what we're going to be seeing here are two things. One of them is this idea of something called linkage and Vietnamization. The other one is this real permanent distrust of government we're going to be having here over this issue in Vietnam. So how do we have this? I can't even keep that up. So how do we even have all of this play out, right? We know Richard Nixon wins election in 1968, and he promises peace with North Vietnam. We know that he says we're going to have peace with Vietnam, but the way he says it, of course, remember, is that we're going to have peace with honor. We're going to have peace here in Vietnam in a way that is going to make sure that America doesn't lose this war, but that we're done fighting it, right? We don't have to win it, but we're not going to lose it. We're just going to be done fighting it. So he starts to ask his advisor, Henry Kissinger, and Kissinger is this guy right here, by the way, right above my head. That's Henry Kissinger right up there. He's a very funny German accent. And Henry Kissinger is going to look to improve relations. And here's his clever idea. He says, you know what I know, Mr. President Nixon, that North Vietnam is getting most of its supplies and resources from two places, right? From the Soviet Union and China. What if we, Mr. President, what if we become better friends with the Soviets and with China, and we convince them that as better friends, it's to their advantage to stop the flow of supplies to Vietnam? Could be a way to get around this whole Vietnam War thing. It might make getting out of the war easier. Nixon says, "Oh, it's brilliant. I love that idea, Kissinger. That's fantastic. Pursue it right away." And so Kissinger begins to pursue this policy of linkage with the Soviet Union and with China. In fact, for the first time in decades and decades and decades, an American president actually goes to China. Nixon actually goes to China, visits with the premier of China, a guy named Mao Zedong, in an attempt to convince them to stop supporting North Vietnam. The second thing he does at the same time is a policy called Vietnamization. And the idea here is that America in 1968 has a ton of troops in Vietnam. And you can see it right there. A ton of troops in Vietnam. And the idea here is if we have a ton of troops in Vietnam, well, why don't we slowly lower the number of troops in Vietnam? And you can see my little pointer right over there to the right, kind of running down the slide here. And as we slowly lower the number of troops we have in Vietnam, what we're actually doing is raising the number of troops that the South Vietnamese have to use to do the fighting. We're putting more of the fight on them as we come down. South Vietnamese responsibility goes up. And this, again, should allow America to withdraw. If the war was lost, it's not us doing the losing, it's the South Vietnamese, because America is slowly withdrawing. So we do a variety of things here to start this process of trying to get out of Vietnam peace with honor. We leave, but we don't lose. We leave on our terms. The problem with this is that even trying to leave on our terms, it's going to take a long time. It's going to take a couple of years for South Vietnam to be ready to take care of itself and for America to be able to get out. So you're going to see the anti-war movement continue to grow in America, more and more new participants, because it's going to take a long time. And we're going to see some really controversial decisions as we try to get out of this conflict, including things like invading Cambodia, an event called My Lai, and some other stuff that happens at Kent State. So let's show you what I mean. There are, and there's lots of little tiny things, but there are three really big major events between 69, 70, and 71 that really encourage Americans to join the anti-war movement. One of them is going to be a tremendously terrible massacre of South Vietnamese civilians, women and children, at a little tiny hamlet in South Vietnam called My Lai. And I have here for you a number of images showing that slaughter. And these images made their way back to America. Front page stuff, nightly news stuff. And the American public were devastated by this, that we're sending our kids, our sons, to Vietnam to do that? To cause that chaos, that terror, that horror? It really makes a lot of Americans question, regardless of how long it's going to take to get out, if we shouldn't just get out right away. Another part of this turmoil that happens is a year later, 1970, when Nixon realizes that he has to go after the Ho Chi Minh Trail in order to stop the flow of supplies into South Vietnam. He realizes that, yes, linkage is helping. The fact that we're becoming friendlier with the Soviets and with the Chinese is helping, but it's not stopping the flow of supplies enough. Nixon says that in order to fully stop the flow of supplies heading into the Viet Cong, what we're going to have to do is attack a couple different places. We're going to have to attack Cambodia, and we're going to have to attack Laos. We're going to have to invade. We're going to have to bomb them. We're going to have to destroy the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Johnson was afraid to do it for a long time, but Nixon realizes that if you want to get out of a fight without getting knocked down, you got to damage your opponent heavy enough that they can't fight back. So Nixon says, we're going to go. We're going to go hard. We're going to go after Cambodia. We're going to go after Laos, and we're going to show them that we mean business. And business do we mean for sure. Take a look at this. This map highlights for you, with every little red dot, one of the nations, or one of the locations, I should say, that we bomb in Cambodia between 1965 and 1973. 113,000 sites in Cambodia we bomb, many of them along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And this doesn't even include the actual invasion, right? This doesn't even include the invasion which is going to happen here, where American troops, South Vietnamese troops, actually invade Cambodia in secret, going after the Viet Cong, going after the Ho Chi Minh Trail. But it just goes to show you that Nixon's not messing around, right?
You don't mess around with Richard Nixon, I'll tell you that much right now. Richard Nixon says we're going to get out of here. No, we're getting out our way. Peace with honor.
Well, as you can imagine, when this breaks news that America's invading another country, bombing another country in order to secretly get out of Vietnam and peace with honor, people will protest. And so one of the things that really disheartens Americans happens at a place called Kent State in Ohio. It's a college. And at an anti-war protest there, the National Guard opens fire on the anti-war protesters, killing 4 students who were just protesting at Kent State. And America's tearing itself apart over this whole issue of whether or not we should be in the war or we shouldn't. But arguably the most
Damaging thing to Richard Nixon and the war effort. Hold on one second, Richard Nixon needs his tea. Delicious.
arguably the most controversial thing that emerges that really hurts America and really creates that long-term distrust in government that we have as Americans still today when it comes to war is this set of documents right here. It's called the Pentagon Papers. They weren't released until 2011 in its entirety. But what this is was a secret report that was written in 1967, 1971, 4 years later. Small parts of the report are leaked to the press, and the government goes nuts because what the Pentagon Papers show is that America, since the very beginning, since 1964, its government, LBJ, Democrats and Republicans, and Nixon, all of them together, have consistently been lying to the American people about this war. It gets so bad the federal government actually tries to sue the journalists. The Supreme Court actually dismisses those charges and says, no way. Get out of here with that garbage. The government's been lying to people since the beginning about this war. You put all these 3 things together and you're going to have more and more people saying, peace with honor is a great idea, Nixon, but I want out, and I want out now. And to Nixon's chagrin, that means like anger and being upset. All of this is happening as a new presidential election's rolling up in 1972. So Nixon has to convince people that even though we have more people than ever in the anti-war movement, and even though with the Pentagon Papers there's a real distrust in government, he has to convince people to vote with him and vote for him so that America can get out peace with honor. And believe it or not, he wins. he wins. The Democratic candidate at the time, a guy named George McGovern, he is campaigning strongly anti-war. And it's a tight race, and Nixon is criticized over the Pentagon Papers. He's criticized over Cambodia and Laos. He's criticized. But what Nixon argues is that America has the military might to end this war on her terms, and that these deaths should not have been for nothing. And as October approaches and Election Day approaches in November, Richard Nixon says this. He says, "Peace is at hand." We're close to winning, folks, in 1972. We are close to being out. Negotiations were almost there. And they were until November of 1972. Right when Nixon is getting elected, the North Vietnamese walk away from the negotiations, and America is left going, we just said that this was going to be over, so you got to come back and finish negotiating with us? And the North Vietnamese are like, I don't think so. So Nixon says, bring it. To bring them back to the table, Nixon authorizes something called Operation Linebacker 2. And for 11 days straight, America bombs the bejesus out of North Vietnam. And I don't mean just a little bit. You ever heard the phrase carpet bombing? When you drop so many bombs, it's like an entire carpet of destroyed land from one side of the country to the other. Carpet bombing. Yeah, that's where they get this idea from. That idea that bomb them back into the Stone Age, this is where it comes from, that saying. We drop tons, thousands of tons of bombs on Vietnam, 24 hours a day, 11 days straight. These two images right here that I'm blowing up for you, these are the main streets and markets of the capital of North Vietnam at the time, a place called Hanoi. That's nothing left. I mean, it's completely and utterly destroyed. I mean, there's nothing left. Zero, zip, zilch, nada. So the Vietnamese, North Vietnamese, are convinced to come back to the table and to pursue negotiations, and we do get a settled peace, and we are out. 1973. The final Americans finally leave in 1975, but the war technically ends in 1973 for us, although we're not all the way out until 1975. In other words, we're looking at 10 years from when first-time American combat troops arrive to the last time that we end up leaving. And prior to Afghanistan, this was our longest war that we'd ever seen. But with us gone, even though it was the longest war we'd ever seen, doesn't that beg the question of what was one of the reasons we were here for to begin with? Did we achieve any objectives? Remember what Eisenhower was worried about? That domino theory? Well, soon after we leave, in 1975, Cambodia falls to the communist group known as the Khmer Rouge. North Vietnamese invade South Vietnam, and rapidly, within like 6 months, capture the entire country under communist rule. Laos falls to communists in the summer of 1975. And the last Americans are out of South Vietnam in April of 1975, when South Vietnam officially surrenders to the North. And you can see that here. You can see right here, doot, 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 and up there, you can see the last Americans and other South Vietnamese people fleeing the country. End result, Eisenhower's no dummy, folks. Domino theory's true. 1975, Cambodia, Vietnam, Laos all go communist. Containment has failed. And our troops are coming home. And so what do we do? How does that impact us? I think one of the ways you can kind of figure out how it impacts us is by taking a look at the cost, right? You could say, all right, well, it costs a ton of money, 173, billion dollars in that time's cost. 58,000 dead, 300,000 wounded, 2 million total North and South Vietnamese soldiers and civilians dead over the course of that war. You got post-traumatic stress disorder for soldiers of all types. You got soldiers coming home to an unpopular war, from an unpopular war. They weren't celebrated. This isn't like coming home from Korea or World War II, where you have these big parades and people kissing you in Times Square and ticker tape and confetti and all that jazz. That's not how this is playing out. Many of these guys didn't even want other people to know they'd been in Vietnam. The president himself sees his war powers restricted with this War Powers Act that I'm circling right over here next to my eyeball, which says that the president can't just wage war however he wants to. It puts some limits on his power to wage war, like he has to withdraw troops within 90 days unless Congress says that he can keep them there otherwise. He has to ask for permission to send troops. Of course, I want to put this out. No president has actually followed this rule at all. Hasn't asked. And Congress hasn't held him accountable. But I just want you to understand the impact on the American psyche, too. The late 1970s and early 1980s saw a real string of pop culture that was trying to help regular Americans understand what it meant as an American to fight the Vietnam War. The movie Rocky, is an allegory for the Vietnam War. Right, here's one of Sylvester Stallone's quotes from Rocky. Life's not about how hard of a hit you can give, it's about how many you take and can still keep moving forward. Right? It doesn't matter how hard America can hit Vietnam. We know we can hit them as hard as possible, but what is the true definition of greatness, right? And that's Rocky, right? Is how many beatings we can take and still keep going. We can take a 10-year beating and we can still keep going. I mean, check this out, right? Rocky doesn't even win the fight, right? Rocky doesn't even win in Rocky 1. He loses. He loses, just like America lost in Vietnam. But Rocky goes the distance, right? Rocky is a guy that goes all of these rounds with the champ Apollo Creed. I mean, look at him. Look at Rocky right now up there. Look at him. Right? He can barely stand up. There's America, folks, right here. There's America going into the final round. Peace with honor. Right? Let's fight this war to the very end. Let's keep going to the very end. And it's not about whether or not we win. It's not about how hard of a hit we give our opponent. It's about how many hits we can take and keep going. And so you see them here, right? Circling. Boom. There's a big hit on Rocky. Give me another one, right? Don't back off, Rocky. Peace with honor. Peace with honor, right? We're not quitting. We're not getting knocked out. And there we go, right? Still keep moving forward. How many hits can I take and still keep moving forward? That's the whole idea. That's the whole concept. And you can hear the crowd, right? They're not cheering for the champ. They're cheering for Rocky because he's going the distance. He's going to fight all the way to the end. Even though he's going to lose, he's going the distance all the way to the end. And he's going to still be standing even at the very end of the last round. Rocky will still be there. So America has this kind of pain it has to deal with in a process. And movies like Rocky and many others, songs as well, and pop culture help us kind of process this. Peace with honor, this war that we fought that we didn't win, we kind of lost, did lose, and how we're going to keep moving forward.